We're looking at transportation in vascular plants this time around, and this is to follow on from our other plant exchange surfaces, but this time we're looking to compare the structure and function of xylem and phloem tissue. So we know that autotrophs use light energy to make their own chemical energy source via photosynthesis, and that this process is occurring in the leaves of in the chloroplast, essentially. So in order for this process to happen in the leaves, all the necessary elements required for this chemical reaction, need to get there first, basically. And transport systems in vascular plants involve specialized tissues, right? Though plants may not seem as specialized as we are, there are still specialized tissues to ensure that all these substances get where they need to be, and even if they have to travel like substantial distances to get there. So transportation systems are needed to get water from the roots of the plant all the way to the leaves. And if it's a huge tree, then that's a huge distance to travel. Sugars that are created in the leaves then need to be delivered to literally every single cell in that organism in an efficient manner. So this is a challenging task. The two main types of specialized transportation tissues that we are discussing are xylem and phloem. Okay, xylem are in charge of the water and the inorganic ion transportation that's dissolved in the water, while the phloem manages the dissolved sugars and all the other organic substances. So these are continuous, closed, tubular pathways through the roots, the stem and the leaves, and it's basically similar to our blood vessels in animals. Okay, the arrangement of the xylem and phloem are really distinctive within the anatomy of the plant, and they huddle together in these things called vascular bundles. So we'll discuss xylem first, and these are made of cells which form tubes to carry water and dissolved minerals from the roots to all the other parts of the plants, but they only do this in one direction, from roots to leaves, and it's their structure that makes them really, really unique. Xylem tubes are actually made up of dead xylem cells joined end to end. And they're surrounded and protected by living cells. So when the xylem cells die, the cell walls kind of at each end start to dissolve, and they form these really long straw-like tubes. They have thick cell walls to make the xylem tubes really, really strong. So straw. Xylem also have a secondary function of support, and the walls of the xylem are lignified, which is strengthened by a substance called lignin, and this allows the xylem to withstand pressure changes as water moves through the plant. So when someone cuts an old tree down, you're revealing a set of rings. These rings are actually the remains of the old xylem tissue, one ring for every year the tree was alive. And if you put celery into water, into some coloured water, and cut it open, the vessels that are carrying the water will be stained. So water is transported to all parts of the plant, and when it reaches the leaves, it's used for photosynthesis, right? Organic sugars are produced. And this is then needing to be delivered to every cell in the body, right? In the plant's body, essentially. And now it's the phloem's time to shine, okay? Phloem cells are laid out end to end throughout the entire plant, and like xylem cells, phloem cells form these tubes. But the difference is that these ones don't need to die to do their job, right? They aren't strengthened by lignin, and interestingly, mature phloem cells don't even really have a nucleus. So still kind of big, long tubes, but very different in structure. Right, so the ends of phloem cells have holes and they look like sieves. So cytoplasm actually passes through them, connecting them side by side cells, essentially. And phloem tissues transport the dissolved organic substances to storage sites where they're needed for, to where they're needed for growth and metabolism. So some of these things, we're talking fruit nectar, flower nectar, and what they're aiming to do is then attract animals and pollinators to spread their seeds. So if we look at this transport process as a whole, firstly, water and minerals have to actually enter the root cells, and these cells are really specifically designed to increase their surface area for absorption. So they have this long protrusion. There's some extracellular absorption of water and minerals, meaning that instead of it passing through a cell membrane into the cytoplasm, it can just pass around the cells instead of using various types of membrane transport to get into the root hair cells, and that's what those long protrusions are. So there's a lot going on at this point in time for that water to get into the plant and eventually into the xylem. So eventually the water and the minerals all end up in the same place, regardless of whether they enter the plant across the membranes or extracellularly. And once inside, they make their way to the xylem, and they're moved upwards from the roots to the leaves in a process known as transpiration. And this is driven by heat energy, okay? It's facilitated by the cohesive bonds that help water molecules stick together, and they sort of drag each other up these tubes, and this creates this differential pressure gradient, meaning they can only go one way up this tube. Now, about 99% of the water taken in by the plant can be lost to transpiration. So the plant's environment is really, really influential on how fast this process actually occurs. If there's more stomata on the leaves and they're open, it allows for the plant to be dried out faster, right? Moving more water up that xylem. And if there's an increase in, say, temperature or wind, more water vapor is moved away from the leaves again, increasing that rate of transpiration. Now, if the humidity is really high or the temperature, then the rate actually drops because there's more water vapor in the air, so the concentration gradient drops. So there's no real need to pull that water up and out of the leaves. When it's night and it's cool, with an increase in humidity, plants draw less water and lose less water from the leaves. If it is daytime and it's warm and it's dry, then the transpiration rate is going to be really, really high. Now, plants in the desert aim to lose as little water as possible to transpiration, but this means they have to obviously make quite a lot of adaptations, and they must have fewer stomata. They have to have them only open at night or when there's no sun. They can have these rolled up leaves to protect the stomata. They also have really large volumes of water stored in vacuoles, just to, as a just in case, essentially, which is why succulents and cacti and things like that are known as succulents. So once the water and the minerals have reached the leaves, the mesophyll cells can use them as reactants in photosynthesis, and those organic solutes are produced, and these sugars are dissolved and transported around the plant through the phloem, and we know them as sap, essentially. And this process is called translocation, okay? Not transpiration, translocation. So leaves are known as the source, and plants also have sinks where they store these sugars, like flowers, fruits, whatever else, stems. About 90% of the sap is sucrose dissolved in water, and their transport through the phloem is an active process through the cytoplasm of the phloem cell tube. So we're making sugars, we then probably have to use cellular respiration to convert those sugars into ATP because this is an active process. So there's a number of complex things occurring in these plants, and while they may not have entire organ systems dedicated to transport and gas exchange, their specialized cells and tissues are still perfectly adapted to suit their function. So making sure we understand how those water, how the water is traveling, what is happening, where it's being sent, what's then being produced via photosynthesis, and then what's happening to those products as well. So really, we're also aiming to just compare the structure and function of them. So it's important for us to not only understand the anatomy of them, but what part of the processes they are being involved in.